Hello and welcome back to the channel. My name is Dan and I'm here to bring you another FPL video. In this one, it's going to be my reactions and thoughts to the player price reveals so far. We had day one reveals happen yesterday afternoon where we had one player from each team revealed first up for 20 teams. We then had multiple teams tweet out their reveals with an additional 4 players. So some of the teams have had 5 player reveals, some have only had 1. So we're going to be discussing all 20 teams in this video, and I'll keep adding the new ones as the days progress in future videos. So let's have a look first of all then at Arsenal. Let's jump into them. As we've said in the fixture analysis, guys, these guys are going to be definitely hot on the radar for game week 1. S-tier fixtures, in my opinion, and Ødegaard is coming in at £8.5 million. I think that he is going to be an option for us. I think it'll be interesting to see how he ties against Saka. I think Saka probably ends up being 9 million, if I'm honest. If he's the same, I think most people will flock to Saka. But maybe a decision to be made there about these two. But genuinely, 8.5 million, I think, is just a little bit overpriced for him. I would have much preferred to see him at 8 million. I just think that he was so prolific last season. I can see why FPL have done it. It does make sense. But it just may be a little bit difficult to fit him in, like I said, unless Saka is just too high for us to reach, right? And gives us that route to the Arsenal attack. So sitting on the fence a little bit with him. What's your thoughts in the comments, guys? Let me know what you think about Ødegaard at 8.5 million. Moving into Aston Villa next up. Again, only one player revealed so far in Ollie Watkins, and that is an £8 million forward. Again, I think maybe 0.5 million too expensive, if I'm honest, guys. He finished the season at 7.3 million. I think an 8 million price point is it's okay to try to reach, but we've got various 7.5 million forwards that have been revealed as well, which make more sense to me. So I'm not sure that I would stretch to the 8 million to begin with. That being said, we know what great season he had under Emery last season, and I think that probably will continue, even with Europe to contend with as well later on in the season. So definitely one to watch, but I'm just not sure game week 1 bandwagon at all for Mr. Watkins. With Bournemouth, nothing really to talk about here. They've had Cliver, of course, announced and signed. They've revealed him as a 5.0 million midfielder. I don't think he's going to come into our thinking. I won't deep dive into these price points too much, I don't think. And sorry if a lot of you might feel that that's not doing individuals justice. But the reality is a lot of players at 5.0 million are never going to be considered because you just save the 0.5 and go for a 4.5 million, or you end up looking at the sort of 6 to 6.5 million bracket in terms of an upgrade. It's very rare, in my opinion, that we see a 5 million midfielder kind of come to the forefront. I might eat my words on that, and Clive might be the guy that does it. But for the most part, I think in terms of the template, this is a price point that I'm not really interested in to start with. So I'm not going to go too detailed in the other guys that are priced this way. But maybe later on the line, when Bournemouth's fixtures improve, when we've seen a little bit more about how they're shaping up and just in general how they seem to be gelling together, maybe he becomes an option. But right now, after the reveal, I'm not really too interested in him. Let me know in the comments again if you think differently. The first exciting kind of reveal here, though, is Mbeumo at £6.5 million, with being reclassified as a midfielder as well, which is very interesting. So good to see that FPL are trying to put in some level of consistency here. He does play out on the wide areas, which is exactly where Salah plays, where Son plays, where Rashford plays, all of which are listed as midfielders. So I'm glad we get a bit of consistency there. It means Mbeumo now is on the cards for a clean sheet point, and of course scores an extra point for every single goal scored. Now the most important thing to note about Mbeumo is not just his 6.5 million price point, but also the fact that he's probably going to be playing as an out of position midfielder on the actual physical field in terms of a number 9. He may also be on penalties, which is an absolute fantastic price for a penalty taker. And also because Ivan Toney is banned until January next year, it makes a lot of sense, I think, to start with this man. Yes, they have Spurs on the opening day. It is an away match for Brentford as well. It is at Spurs' ground, but I still think there's going to be goals in that game, to be honest. I'm excited about this price. I think I'm going to have him in game week 1. I think it's an absolute no-brainer. But once again, let me know in the comments below what your thoughts are on Mbeumo. Mitoma next up then for Brighton, revealed again at £6.5 million. I think it's a fair price. I think he went through a pretty prolific purple patch at one point in the season last season. He didn't show a full level of consistency that I think people wanted, but he definitely was a rank killer and a rank gainer for many managers. So I don't think there's going to be any argument on his price. But that being said, you could probably argue that he's actually a little bit cheaper than he should be, right? Maybe he should be in the 7 mark and provide a little bit of a kind of awkward price point. But being the same as Mbeumo and others as well to note, I feel like it's really important that we cover it, maybe in both roles. Maybe we do have Mbeumo and Mitoma come into a kind of 3-5-2 draft, for example, because the midfield at the moment just seems to be absolutely packed out with great options. So very excited as well that maybe Mitoma comes into the squad from game week 1 as well. Moving into Burnley, next up, they're the first team or the first squad that we had 5-player reveals for. Not going to really spend too much time on them, unfortunately. Maybe you could say the goalkeeper or Roberts as a 4.5 million defender and goalkeeper respectively. Maybe they come into the mix at some point, right? Maybe they're options just as either bench cover, maybe bench boostable options. Roberts at 4.5 maybe does make the template just because I think he was so attacking last season. And Vincent Kompany has obviously done fantastic things with the club. They've come a long way since the days of Sean Dyche, right? But the top 3 guys, unfortunately, in Benson, Brownhill and Zaroury, they're all just such awkward price points in 5.5 million, that I just don't think they're going to make the squads. We did have Neto last season at 5.5, and we stretched that way because there was no one else really that met the criteria to kind of fit into the template, right? But I think there's going to be so many different options now for us, especially with maybe a 1 premium draft, that these guys are never really going to come into the mix, unfortunately. So maybe we if there's some price reductions at some point, maybe a Brownhill comes in at some point, maybe Zaroury. I don't know enough about any of the Burnley players, if I'm being completely honest, to justify putting them in the squad, and especially for game week 1. Next up, we do have Chelsea. Only 1 player revealed so far, and that is Nkunku. Again, another price that I'm very excited about, and position as well. So he's been listed as a forward. I'm not too sure that he'll play in the number 9 position for Chelsea, I'm honest. Maybe Poch Plus play him in more of an attacking number 10 role, or just in general, just play him in the midfield. But listed as a forward, I think is maybe a negative, maybe a positive. The good thing is because we've got such a packed out midfield, he becomes a viable option, in my opinion, alongside Haaland as that second striker. Maybe 7.5 million is just a little bit too much. Maybe we need to save a million or maybe 0.5, whatever it might be. But I'm seriously tempted by that price point. Chelsea, of course, I don't think they can finish worse than they did last season. I just think it's going to be impossible. I think they're going to be back competing for Europe. I think under Poch, it's going to be a completely different regime. And Nkunku's coming in at a good time. It's a refresh on the manager. The squad are probably going to be overhauled pretty much across the summer, right? They've already sold Mason Mount. They're already sold Kovacic. They're selling. They almost sold Ziyech, unfortunately, with a medical falling down. So you can see they're completely transforming the team that's more than likely going to feature in game week 1. And that's probably the only risk, is that we don't know how they're going to function, right? The thing is, though, is Chelsea's fixtures are so good past game week 1. Yes, they've got Liverpool in game week 1, but beyond that, it's looking fantastic. So I really do feel like he could be a punt, or maybe one of the Chelsea boys in general could be that differential in a template that could maybe improve your rank slightly. So I'm really excited about Nkunku as a pick. Let me know in the comments below what you think about him. Next up, we have Eze, another 6.5 million midfielder, which is why, again, I think that price point is so attractive. I think he's a fantastic creative player. And with news of Zaha more than likely leaving Crystal Palace, I think he's had about 4 or 5 different offers now from different clubs on the table as a free agent. I think Palace are one of those clubs, so he could very well stay. But if he doesn't, I think that frees up Eze in a more progressive, more attacking role than he's already got. Maybe even sits on penalties as well, guys. So again, at 6.5 million, we potentially could have Mbeumo on penalties. We could have Eze on penalties. I just think that, in any team, in any draft of any season, that's fantastic value. So I think that it's a really smart price point. I really like it. I just don't think I'll be putting him in game week 1. Moving on to Everton next up. I have made a slight error here, so apologies. I didn't update the graphic properly with the 4.5 million price point of Pickford. He is certainly not 6.5 million. Otherwise, I think we'd just be skipping this slide entirely. But no, he is £4.5 million, and I genuinely think he's someone that we should consider. Everton's fixtures are really, really good. I think under Dyche, you're expecting low-scoring games across the board. And I think that Pickford, he's England's number one. He's there for a reason. I think at 4.5, he's a genuine consideration, but not much more to be said other than that, guys. Fulham next up, another team that have revealed multiple prices, so we can talk a little bit more about these. Leno, 4.5 million. I don't think he's a game week one option just because how bad Fulham's fixtures are, in my opinion. But it is worth noting that he was one of the highest goalkeepers for the save statistic. He made quite a phenomenal amount of saves, which means that he may come into the mix at some point in a wildcard draft early on if Fulham's fixtures swing. Other than that, I just can't see him being an option. Tete and Ream as 4.5 million defenders, possibly. They could rotate well. I haven't done enough research yet in terms of who rotates well. I'll do that more once the drafting phase kicks in, but maybe they become options. Unfortunately, Pereira at 5.5 million is just outside of reach, in my opinion. When he was 4.5 last season, it made a lot of sense. Enabling midfielder, on set pieces, great attacking threat. That extra million, unfortunately, it's just too much of a stretch, in my opinion. So I don't think we're going to see him in our teams. Mitrovic at 7.5, again, great price point. Really excited about that. It's in Nkunku's price point. It's also only 0.5 million difference between him and Watkins. Look, I don't think, again, he's going to be a game week one option, but I definitely feel like he's got to be in the mix at some point. We know that he's proven in terms of goal scoring, right? He can do it. His penalties were woeful, so maybe he doesn't stay on them. But I do think that at that price point, he's a possible option later down the line. Liverpool next up, one of the other teams as well that fully revealed their announcement. So Salah at 12.5 million, more than fair price in my opinion, based on last season's performance and what we anticipate that he's always going to be able to do, right, as such a prolific attacker. Trent's the really interesting one though, at £8 million, guys. Has that put you off? I really want to understand from the community's perspective on, are you going to go with him game week one regardless? Because for me, I'm pretty much locked in with him. I think with his progressive midfielder role, it just makes sense. He's listed as a defender, so all that speculation of a reclassification in terms of position can be put in the bin, because essentially he played 36 out of 38 games, I think, last season in defence, in terms of starts, right, and playing the game. So there was no reason to reclassify him into that midfielder role. We're going to get him in that progressive role under Klopp more than likely again this season. At 8 million, he's almost like another midfielder, but you just get the clean sheet points on top. So let me know what you think. I'm really positive about it. I think it's going to shake it up a little bit. And that extra 0.5 million, because most people predicted 7.5, I think is going to put a few people off, which I like. I like having a possible differential that is or was maybe locked in before on a template. So I like that option personally. Mac 10, unfortunately, I don't think is going to be an FPL option for us, although he's important for Liverpool's restructure and refresh of that midfield. He's not the main man like he was at Brighton. I say main man. He was one of many, to be honest. Brighton have got, so many individuals that do so well for the club, and he was, a World Cup winner. So I do think, yes, he's got the quality, but under Klopp for this Liverpool side, I don't necessarily see him being, as important for us to pick from an FPL point of view, if I'm honest. Robertson at 6.5 million is an interesting talking point, because you essentially get a Liverpool fullback for 1.5 million cheaper. He doesn't play as progressive as Trent anymore. That's got to be mentioned. So that 1.5 million is definitely going to get lost in there to some degree. But that doesn't mean that he's not on set pieces or hasn't got the assist threat still, because he has. His progressive work is still there. Maybe you could argue there's a bit more rotation risk with him and Tsimikas potentially. But for 6.5 million, does he tempt you guys? Like, it is very, very hard. It's a decision that, maybe if you want to spend that extra 1.5 somewhere else, but still cover the Liverpool defence, can you even consider Robertson cover for Trent? I don't know. Let me know what your thoughts are. And then finally, Darwin, another 7.5 million forward, which again, I really like. I think this price is absolutely great for him. We know that there's possible rotation with the amount of forwards now or kind of attacking players, right, that Liverpool have got. Salah, Jota, Diaz, Darwin. There's just so many options now for them that he doesn't necessarily get the nailed front three. That being said, at such a good kind of price point like that, I feel like he's got to be in the mix, right? Because we said, well, I certainly said that I thought that maybe people will end up with 2 Liverpool, maybe 2 Arsenal, 2 City, 2 Liverpool as their kind of structure. That was on the basis that I felt that Salah and Trent would probably be locked in. But now I see that price point, again, alongside Nkunku, Mitrovic, and so on. I think that there's a real strong argument maybe to go with him. But he's just not been consistent enough last season, right? So maybe he's a wait and see. Next up, we've got Luton, another team that did have a full reveal. I don't know much about these guys, to be honest, so I'm not going to deep dive into all of them. The one that sticks out to me the most, stupidly, is the £4 million defender in Bell. I think, to be honest, I think he played 43 out of 46 games in the Championship. And I think Luton are probably going to keep the structure of their squad as much as possible. I think I saw a video, I don't know who the individual was, I don't know if it was the chairman or someone else, that mentioned that the Luton players deserve the opportunity to be able to play in the Premier League, right? They've worked hard to get this far, so why do they have that taken away from them just based on transfer activity? So I do think that's a positive. If an individual has started 43 out of 46 games in the Championship, you'd anticipate that he's probably going to be a starter as well for Luton in the Prem. So £4 million defender. Luton's fixtures are actually quite good as well in terms of the opening fixtures, by the way. So it doesn't necessarily come into the starting 11, but I think he's pretty much got to be the £4 million nailed defender as part of the template. The rest of the guys, maybe you could say Osho at £4.5 million at some point, but the other guys, £5.5 million for Morris, 5 for Adebayo and 5 for Clark. They're just awkward price points in my opinion, and maybe never come into our consideration. Morris maybe as a bench boost option alongside the likes of McBurney and other individuals that are priced similarly, but I really don't think we're going to be seeing much of them in our early drafts. Moving into Manchester City next, we did have the big man himself revealed as £14 million. Really smart pricing from FPL. Doesn't, I think, give too much of a headache, though, for some people, or for most managers. I think he still, by default, just goes into most people's drafts. But 14 million is great. I think it's the perfect point. He's made FPL history alongside some really key names that absolutely smashed FPL in previous seasons, like Ronaldo, Van Persie, Omri. He's in absolute, kind of FPL king territory. But it's just needed for him. He's just an absolute monster. We know what he's capable of. He's just won the treble in his first season in England. What is this man not capable of? And I think that's why he's priced that highly. So gives a few people maybe something to think about. Me personally, straight in the team. He's a 14 million lock. I've got 86 million to spend in my mind. There is no doubt about that. But let me know what your thoughts are below, guys. For Manchester United, next up, it is only the one player reveal in Bruno Fernandes. And my God, am I excited about this one as well. £8.5 million for such a creative player and an individual that's on penalties. I don't think he can get much better than that, guys, if I'm honest. I think that if Man United sign a number 9, this guy's FPL appeal tenfolds, because the amount of chances that he created last season were absolutely phenomenal. Big chances. I think it was the most recorded this season, by the way. Chances created, big chances created, was this man. In terms of FPL points, it was really underwhelming for him last season, I think, which is why we've benefited from such a great price reduction. But honestly, 8.5 million, I don't think I can look past him, guys. But again, let me know what your thoughts are. Let me know what your thoughts are. Next up, another talking point again. Newcastle, Kieran Trippier, £6.5 million, guys. I'm going to be honest, I think this is a hard avoid for me personally. When he was 5 million last season, the appeal was because nobody really knew what to expect from Newcastle under Eddie Howe. And also nobody really knew what to expect specifically for Kieran Trippier. So I think it was worth taking the punt at 5 million because not only did it meet a good price point, but also we knew how good he was when he played for Tottenham, right? So now he's 6.5 million. It's just, I think, in my opinion, unjustifiable until later on in the season. Newcastle's fixtures aren't great from game week 1. We've also got the possibility of some set pieces maybe being taken off of him now. Newcastle have had some activity in the transfer market. The bonus points probably then reduce heavily. If he's offset pieces, essentially, then his bonus points almost half instantly, right? If he's not on as many free kicks, not on as many corners, he's not going to be up there as much as he was. And that was a major part of how many points the guy scored in the season. So interesting for me that they've gone so high with him. I only can ever see that if Trent really starts failing at any point, maybe we end up downgrading an 8 million to a 6.5 million player like Trippier that provides that possible attacking threat when Newcastle's fixtures get better and maybe we can spend that 1.5 million elsewhere. That's really the only time that I feel like he's going to come into the mix. But again, guys, these are all talking points. Let me know in the comments below what your thoughts are. Then we've got Nottingham Forest next up, one of the teams that did reveal everybody. I did forget to put Johnson's reclassification in terms of a position of midfielder role, so apologies for that. He has swapped from a forward to a midfielder. That being said, though, both him and Gibbs-White come in at 6 million. So they're a little bit cheaper than Mitoma. They're a little bit cheaper than Mbeumo. But I don't think, again, with Forest fixtures, they come into the mix, unfortunately. Maybe later on, they are going to be really, really good enablers for us. But from game week 1, I don't think they come into the mix. Aurier was a heavily rotated defender, so I'm not sure if his spot is nailed at all. At 4.5 million, though, maybe he makes draft just because he fits that price point. Danilo, again, 5.5 million, really awkward price point. Awani is an interesting one, though, because 6.5 million, I've seen a template. I think FPL Raptor put out just a tweet, essentially, that had been bookmarked like already 500 times or something. And there was a 6.5 million price point there next to Haaland alongside a bunch of other players. So definitely check that out, as it's worth a look. And it does look like a very strong template, I might add, with 6.5 million. So potentially you put him in there just to fit that gap and essentially get a very, very strong game week 1 team. It is worth noting he had a very, very prolific end to the season last season. So maybe that's bumped his price up, that extra 0.5, just because of how strong he finished. So yeah, again, maybe he comes into our thinking at some point. But for me personally, game week 1, not going to be in the draft. Then we look at Sheffield United next up. Again, apologies, not really done too much research on these guys. I knew McBurney from when Sheffield United were previously in the league. Same for Norwood as well. I don't really know much about the other guys though. That being said, Norwood's price point, Berge's price point of 5, I don't think we're ever going to be looking at that. Ende, yes, maybe I've butchered the name, so apologies for that, but 5.5 million, he meets the same price point as Morris from Luton, so potentially he comes in as a bench boost option, something like that later on in the season, but I don't think we see him from game week 1. And then finally, that defender at 4.5 million. I'm not even going to try and attempt a pronunciation on that one, so I'm going to skip that one and just call him the 4.5 million defender. Maybe again he fits that slot for some individuals, but Sheffield United's fixtures I think don't even justify their choices, to be honest. So we can move on to Spurs next up. Again, another exciting price point reveal of Son coming in at 9 million. Absolutely fantastic value, I think, in him. I think if Kane stays as well, that shoots his numbers up, in my opinion, or his appeal. And also, we've had news that Maddison has signed for Tottenham. So a great creative midfielder that created a significant amount of chances in that Leicester squad last season. There was just nobody to put the chances away. If Kane stays, and Son, obviously, to match as well, maybe them as a front two with Maddison behind as a number 10, that could be really strong. That being said, Maddison is probably the one that appeals to me the most out of all three of them, just again because of prices. I think that because Haaland is 14 million, because Salah is 12.5, and because Trent is 8, this is where you have to start taking those small 0.5s, maybe 1 millions away. So if Maddison comes in at 8 million, I can see him more than likely being highly owned in comparison to Son. That being said, Son will probably then end up being a very, very strong differential, because I put Spurs' fixtures in the S tier, maybe controversially, because the first few are a little bit challenging, maybe with Brentford and I can't remember who game week 2 are, but game week 3 to 5, they've got a really strong run. So I think they're going to be one to watch, and I think Son as well is going to be certainly somebody we need to put on the radar. Next up, we got West Ham, 6 million price point midfielder again, Paqueta being revealed. Not going to be in my game week 1 squad. Maybe comes into the mix again. We've said Johnson for Forest, Gibbs-White, also £6 million. Maybe at some point, like I said, with a wild card, a free hit draft, something like that, these players come in. But I genuinely don't think it's a price point we need to worry too much about from game week 1. And then finally, we had the goalkeeper reveal in Sarr for Wolves. So nothing too exciting there, just a 5 million keeper. I don't think we're going to end up spending that, to be honest. I've started drafts in previous seasons with 5 and 5.5 million goalkeepers, and it always ends up the same. I always end up taking money out of the goalkeeper position first before anywhere else when I need to try and make an extra 0.5 or 1 million. So there we go, guys. That's going to wrap up the video. And yeah, sorry that it's maybe a little bit long-winded. I wanted to cover those initial 20 players, but I felt like this was probably the best format to do it. I will keep adding the players as they're revealed for each video. I just won't talk about the ones I've already spoken about, if that makes sense. So I won't elongate the videos too much. This is the longest one by far, just because we had all 20 teams have at least one reveal. But if you enjoyed it, first and foremost, guys, please do consider liking the video and subscribing to the content. Regular season content coming your way to help you improve at FPL. And yeah, looking forward to having you on board, guys. Thank you very much for the support as always, and I'll see you in another video very soon, guys. Take care.